that was good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Wednesday lunch here at the Divinity School. I'm Terry Moy. I'm the Director of Communications here, and I organized this series. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's lunch. Before we get started with the program, I want to do our usual housekeeping, which is to thank our chefs, Emily and Sam, and our entire student crew for their teamwork. This meal from scratch here in the kitchen, and so we do ask that you bus your own station so that they don't have to also clean up. So we have the green bin in the back. It's our composter, and you can put your paper plates and any food and napkins into there. Plastic things, plastic bowls, if you've got one of those, have to go in the garbage. And we have our famous yellow soapy bag out to receive your utensils. You can turn your phone noises off before we get started. That's also appreciated. I also want to let you know about next week's Wednesday lunch. We're going to be hearing from a recent undergraduate, Lexi Engel. She's a chaplain, she's a performance artist, and she's a desk doula. So please look for the emails and sign up for that. And if you don't know about our emails or about how to sign up for events here or find out about other events here, please catch me right after the lunch. So it's my pleasure today to welcome our speaker, who's right here, Kelly Bulkeley. He's the director of the Sleep and Dream Database. He earned a doctorate in religion and psychological studies from the University of Chicago Divinity School, an MTS from Harvard Divinity, and a BA from Stanford. He's a former president of the International Association for the Study of Dreams and senior editor of the APA journal Dreaming. He's written and edited several books, including, among others, Dreaming in the Classroom, Practices, Methods, and Resources in Dream Education, Dreaming in the World's Religions and Comparative History, Big Dreams, The Science of Dreaming and the Origins of Religion, and others. He's joining us this quarter to teach an undergraduate class, Dreaming, Religion, and Psychology, and he's going to talk to us about that today, as well as the perhaps surprising role that University of Chicago scholars have played in the history of sleep and dream research. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bulkeley.
I'm not using a mic, nor do I have notes, but I seem like a comfortable place to stand. So thank you for being here. It's an honor to be with you. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah, so I thought I would share with you some of the things that are going on in this class that I'm teaching, some of the things that I'm hoping to impart to the students, some of the things I'm learning from them. And I want to share with you in particular 3 moments in the class where I'll be highlighting contributions that University of Chicago scholars have made to the history of sleep and dream research that I think are significant both for the class and maybe for you as well. These are little stories, and maybe you'll know some of it, but maybe not all of it, and some new fun facts about the University of Chicago. So this is, as Taryn mentioned, an undergraduate class. Students from all across the different majors, from first years to fourth years. No real connection among them besides a presumed interest in the subject of dreams. As was mentioned, there, maybe some of you know, there's a class in the fall quarter in the classics department on dreams. There can be a class, an undergraduate class in the philosophy department on dreams in the spring. So this is, what I'm doing is being positioned as a religious studies course, kind of in that thematic sequence. And not all the students are taking all of them, but their undergraduates are being offered this thematic sequence across the course of the year to take one or more courses in this sequence on dreams. So I'm treating it as, in some ways, as an introduction to religious studies class. I think there's only one religious studies major in the course, so they're really brand new to all this. So I'm trying to take that into account. Presenting it as kind of a course in religion and science, a dialogue between religion and scientific ways of looking at different phenomena, and looking at dreaming in particular as a point of intersection between religious studies and scientific, psychological approaches to dreams. So that's kind of the framework of the course. I'm starting in kind of a conventional way. We've spent some time with close reading of Freud's interpretation of dreams. We're reading now some Carl Jung. So we're doing kind of an initial run-through of the depth psychological tradition, which will be very influential sort of in later things that we're going to read. And they're struggling with it in productive, good ways. And I'm trying to help both give them the wherewithal to understand these classic thinkers and also to critique them and to think in different ways about how to approach the study of dreams. And so one of the ways I'm doing that is asking the students to read a piece by an anthropologist from the University of Chicago named Dorothy Egan, who was here from the 1930s to the early 1960s. Not only kind of an unknown figure in dream research, but an unknown figure in anthropology as well. And one of the projects that I'm working on while I'm here in addition to the class, Dorothy Egan's papers are here at the Regenstein in the Special Collections section. And a colleague and I, friend Robin Sharif, an anthropologist at University of New Hampshire, we're going to do a kind of a reappraisal of Dorothy Egan's contributions both to dream research and to anthropology. And there's some great material that I think we're going to be able to bring up some interesting features of her life. She was born in the Midwest, went to college in the Midwest, but never graduated. There's some family issues that prevented her from completing her degree. She got married, moved with her husband to New Mexico, where she, and this is in the 1920s, 1930s, became very familiar with the Hopi community there. Learned the language, became friends with many Hopi people. Her husband then brought them to Chicago. He's a graduate student in anthropology. She came along, worked with some social service jobs in the city for a while, and then took a job as a secretary in the anthropology department. Worked there for several years and got to know the faculty at a time when that was a very powerful and influential faculty. Her husband graduates, gets a job in somewhere in Virginia, off they go. They get divorced a little while later. She comes back to Chicago, marries an anthropology professor named Fred Egan, and for the next 20 or 30 years, she occupies, I'm not quite sure what role exactly she had, because she not only didn't have a doctorate, she didn't even have a bachelor's degree as far as I can tell. But for more than 20 years, she taught anthropology here, had grad students, and wrote a series of somewhat influential papers, not as influential as they might have been, I'd say, but mostly focusing on dreams. She was very interested in dreams and in Hopi people's teachings about dreams and dream experiences. And the article I'm asking the students to read is in 1952 issue of American Anthropologist, and it's titled "The Manifest Content of Dreams, a Challenge to Social Science." And what she was arguing in that paper in a prescient way that was not heard at the time, and you have to remember sort of mid-1950s was sort of that was like peak Freud. That was like the most sort of powerful era of psychoanalytic thinking in culture and academia and in mental health care. And she wrote this article challenging one of the basic tenets of psychoanalysis, which was that dreams are meaningless at the manifest content level. That's the disguise, that's the mask. The real meaning is at the latent content level. That's where the dream thoughts are, underneath the disguise, underneath the mask. And so you'll only be misled if you pay any attention at all to the manifest content. And what Dorothy Egan argued in this article and demonstrated with her research was that if you pay attention to people's dreams, if you record people's dreams over a long period of time, and you gather a large enough corpus of reports, you analyze them, just the surface, right, the manifest content, you can identify regularities, patterns, themes that then can be fairly easily correlated with things that the dreamer cares about in his or her waking life. And she said, I've got the data to show this. The manifest content of dreams has this, if approached in a systematic and empirical way, can yield interesting findings. This was not welcome news to sort of the Freudian tenor of the times, and so that article was not, didn't quite have the impact that it might have, because, this is something I can talk about more later perhaps. But current research has fully validated her vision that approaching large collections of dream reports systematically can yield meaningful insights about people's waking lives. And I've already done enough research to see in the collection here one of her early graph papers. She put together this big kind of taped together several pieces of graph paper and dreams on this side and categories on this side, and she'd go through the dreams and check off, animals in this one, colors, physical aggression. And this is the kind of thing that now we're able to do with computers, with various tools of digital linguistic analysis, and a lot of the findings from that realm, which I try to be very active in, like I said, are validating her insights, and not, I would say, being so favorable to Freud, who at the time was much more sort of the dominating figure. So, asking the students to read that paper, that manifest content paper, helping them see that there are other ways to look at dreams besides just Freud and Jung, which is often the way people characterize the psychology of dreaming. It's kind of a polarity between those two, and it's not. She also helps them see that empirical, systematic ways of studying dreams can be fruitful. And most importantly, can be fruitful not just for psychological insights, but for cultural insights. And so one of the substantive findings that Egan made was that the Hopi people with whom she was working, they were nominally Christian. They supposedly converted to Christianity. I'm not sure what kind, but they were treated as Christians. And what she found in her study of their dreams was recurrent references to traditional, ancestral, spiritual, and religious teachings. So what she was arguing was, what you're seeing in the conversion is a superficial experience, and their actual religious and spiritual lives are much more connected to their ancestral heritage than that surface level conversion would lead you to think. So again, something that wasn't really recognized at the time as significant discovery, the idea that using this kind of empirical, systematic method with manifest content can yield interesting insights about religious phenomena. That was something that she saw decades before anybody else. So making sure the students learn about that. Now, Dorothy Egan wasn't the only person sort of pushing back against the Freudian hegemony, and probably the biggest development in the study of sleep and dreams after the emergence of Freud's book, The Interpretation of Dreams, was the discovery of REM sleep and the sleep cycles, the cycle of REM and non-REM sleep, that when we go to sleep at night, our brains don't just shut off like a light switch, but that actually there's a regular and a hardwired system of neural activation during the sleep cycle, with the main sort of visible external component being eyes moving under the eyelids. So researchers here at the University of Chicago made that discovery. Early 1950s, Eugene Azarinsky, grad student, and Nathaniel Pleitman, who's a professor of physiology, they published the first papers on the REM, non-REM cycle. And that's generally credited as kind of launching the scientific study of sleep, and not coincidentally a new phase in the study of dreams, because what they immediately pointed out in these first couple of papers in the 1950s was that when they awakened people, so they identified these two different phases. There's a time when people's their eyes are moving very quickly under their lids, their bodies are clenched up, muscle atonia means they can't move, and then other times when their eyes are just kind of moving very slowly and more relaxed. And the researchers would wake people up in the midst of each of these different phases. Were you dreaming? That was the question they asked. And they found much higher proportion of people saying, yes, I had a dream, when they were awakened from the REM phase than from the non-REM phase. And so the early researchers here, actually, and the term REM sleep, REM, rapid eye movement sleep, was coined by William Dement, who was a grad student here, went on to teach at Stanford University for decades, kind of founded sleep medicine. And he coined that term REM sleep The French, who had a different lineage kind of getting into this realm of research, they had a different nomenclature. They refer to it as paradoxical sleep, that particular phase, because there are qualities of how the brain is working during that phase that are very like waking in terms of certain levels of neural activation, certain kind of regional activation. So what we call, the English researcher would call REM sleep in this French context, calling it paradoxical sleep, was highlighting how it's this kind of hybrid state of mental being, as different from non-REM, almost more different from non-REM sleep than it is from waking, right? That the REM sleep / paradoxical sleep is almost closer neurologically to what's happening in the brain in the waking state. So all this is happening in the 1950s, so very exciting. The University of Chicago is at the center of it. And we're quite excited in particular about how this seems to push back, not only push back on Freud and sort of the idea of dream as wish fulfillments and all the unconscious stuff, but actually kind of push back on the whole psychological enterprise and say dreams are nothing but the outgrowth of REM sleep, right? That here we've got a smoking gun, brain and mind, mind can be reduced to brain. We've solved the mind-body problem. And now there's a lot of excitement around the discovery of REM sleep for that reason. So people even termed REM sleep dream sleep because they thought that the association between REM and dreaming was identical, it was isomorphic. Since then, this is a little ahead of where we are with the class, but I'll be sharing this with the students, and I'll also be sharing with them some of the research that pushes back on that and says not so fast, it's actually much more complex than that. Indeed, there's what researchers call a double dissociation between REM sleep and dreams. You can have one and not the other. There are people with brain damage who no longer have any dream recall or any dream mentation. Their REM and non-REM cycles are fine. People who have brain damage that knocks out REM sleep, they still dream. So it's not, the evidence, the actual evidence is that there's not a one-to-one correlation. There's a connection. There's a sense in which REM sleep triggers dreaming in some regular fashion, but so does non-REM sleep in certain ways. I'm going to try to get there with the students in this kind of subtle approach to the way brain research is helping us understand this, but I'm preparing for the worst in the sense that the reductionist, the appeal of brain reductionism, the appeal of being able to say, we can explain this phenomenon in dream by linking it to that phenomenon in brain physiology, that's very appealing, and particularly appealing perhaps to the students in this class. And I say that because one of the lines of research I pursue is survey research with large groups of demographically diverse representative people to get a sense of broader patterns about dream recall, sleep patterns, people's attitudes about dreams. And in a recent survey I did with a colleague who knows the statistical side of things much better than I do, but helps kind of work through the data, we asked participants to agree or disagree with a series of statements about dreams to gauge their attitudes about dreaming, not just their recall, but what they think about dreams, their beliefs about dreams. So statements like, dreams give me insight into my feelings. Dreams can anticipate things that happen in the future. Dreams are random nonsense from the brain. Do you agree or do you disagree with each of these statements? And most dream research has found that there's, in most variables around sleep and dreams, there tends to be a bias that the younger people tend to be more interested in dreams, have more recall, more frequency of different types of dreams than do older people. And the same, a slight imbalance in gender, where females tend to be a little bit more interested in dreams, more dream recall, more insomnia. Men, less dream recall, less interest in dreams, somewhat better sleep. In this recent study, many of those expected findings came out, but one thing stood out that I'm trying to use for this class is that on the question, do you agree or disagree with the statement, dreams are random nonsense from the brain, The youngest cohort answered the highest frequency of agreeing with that statement. 18 to 34-year-olds were the highest age group, 35 to 54, 55 and older, to agree with the statement that dreams are random nonsense from the brain, which is a very scientific attitude, and you know, we can talk about where that comes from, but it confirms sort of a sense that there is even greater social authority for neuroscience than there ever has been, and these students are influenced by that, and so that's going to be in the classroom. So I've been thinking, when we get to this point, it's going to be a pivotal moment. How will we kind of move from there into the religious studies material that I want to get into? How are we going to move from kind of the brain neuroscience material into looking at religious and cultural and historical dream phenomena in a more dialogical kind of way, not just a reductive way, which I can tell already in the class that's in there. So I'm going to turn for help to the 1984 book by Wendy Doniger, Doniger flirted at the time, A Dream's Illusion and Other Realities. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but this would be I'd say the third pivotal moment in the University of Chicago's contribution to sleep and dream research. This is, by many accounts, one of the best books in the 20th century, I would say, on the study of dreams. Hasn't been a better one since, certainly in the outside of kind of hardcore psychology and neuroscience. It's widely cited, referenced in anthropology and history, in psychology itself, as well as in religious studies. Its influence, I would say, it hasn't only been in the number of citations that people have made of it, but the way it has opened up a field for other people who have written articles and books about dreams to be able to say to their often skeptical editors at academic presses, at university presses, say, hey, you know, she wrote this great book on dreams. It's a good thing. There's something there. So it's really it's been a powerful book, and I'm hoping it's going to help at this pivotal moment of the class of helping the students see how we can weave together Western scientific views, Freudian views, Jungian views, and bring those into a fruitful and productive dialogue with myths, with religious phenomena, religious texts, religious figures, different cultural teachings, a lot of anthropology. I got here in myself in 1986, so a couple years after the book came out, in no small part. Because of the book, I wanted to study with the person who wrote that. And I remember early on getting there, she changed her name back to Wendy Doniger, and I remember somebody saying, you know, do you think people are going to be confused? You know, Wendy Doniger, Flaherty, or, you know, are you worried about that? She said, I'm not worried at all. I'm famous under both names. Not a problem. That was true. And everybody's perhaps got their own favorite book of hers, but I think if you haven't read this, it's really it's a tremendous book. In some ways, it brings together kind of the best kind of form and content of her scholarship, in the sense that the material she's working with, the myths, the phenomenology of dreaming, just works very well with her kind of playful yet extremely erudite writing style. So it's been a powerful book through the history of recent dream research. Like I said, still widely admired and referenced today. And I'm not going to have the students read the whole thing, but a selection, hopefully to, again, create this sense that not only are we bringing these psychological theories to bear as a way of studying these religious phenomena, we're going to look at these different religious traditions to help us understand what Freud and Jung and the sleep lab researchers have been doing. That's I think one of Wendy's great strengths as a scholar was stimulating that kind of interdisciplinary dialogue, and that's what I'm hoping the students will take. So that's the plan anyway. We'll see if it pans out, and so that's sort of what I had in mind to talk about. Do you have any I don't know if you have any questions or comments or suggestions or anything like that? Happy to hear them. Broad University of Chicago. Take home message, yeah.
I do have a question.
Sure.
I seem to go in spurts. I don't know if this is normal. Like I'll have dreams for a number of nights and then none. But I don't know, is it common? It seems like when I'm having a dream and something bad is going to happen, like I'm going to fall off a cliff, I always wake up.
Mm-hmm.
So it must, do you think this is a normal type thing?
Yeah. You'd have to light out maybe $200 an hour.
I've never through the awful thing happening.
Yeah, no. So there are typical recurrent dream themes, and that is one of them. That anthropologists going back to Dorothy Egan's day were going around the world, finding the smallest tribes they could and asking, do you have dreams where you're falling and then you wake up? And then say, yes, we do. So these are recurrent, hardwired aspects of the dreaming imagination. And the simplest way to respond is that dream themes like that often have they do have a collective sense of losing gravity, losing sort of volition. There's some kind of generic metaphorical meanings that are often associated. But then it's almost always, why do you as a particular individual have this particular dream at this particular moment? There's always kind of some autobiographical something or other there that. So that's kind of the fun of exploring dreams. Is ideally is that you're working with both these collective, almost pan-species psychological themes, and yet it becomes very intrinsic to each individual what the dream is actually about. I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah.
So your younger students who indicated that they thought the dreams were nonsense. Did you also ask them if they were particularly religious or if they were part of a cultural group that were involved in cultural activities that would allow? I mean, why do you think were they less religious than older groups? Were they less attached to cultural groups? I mean, what explains that?
Yeah, I don't know, and I can't say about the students in this particular class. I'm kind of inferring and just kind of sensing what I'm hearing. I'm not probing their background, just so that's clear. This is more generational in a sense, and I think it's another interesting finding from the same series of surveys is that taking the kind of positive statements about dreams and the negative statements, dreams are boring, who has time for dreams, on the negative side, and the other things on the positive side, that people who are self-describing themselves as atheists have the most negative attitudes towards dreams. People who describe themselves not as any particular, and there are all sorts of options for different Protestant denominations, every other denomination, but people who self-identify as something else. I'm not an atheist, I'm not nothing, I'm not one of these, I'm something else. They have the highest or most positive attitudes towards dreams, the highest frequencies of saying yes to the positive statements. So there is something, and that correlates with youth as well. There are actually more atheists among the young, but they're also more unattached, spiritual but not religious types among the young too. So that more research can, is what answers these questions. But these are the things that are, in the back.
So you spoke a little bit about the relationship between sleep science and dreams.
Between
sleep science or the scientific world and dreams.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering sort of if you have any thoughts about perhaps the arts world or sort of wider cultural spheres and their relationships with our understanding of dreams, and particularly of surrealism, and if you think there's sort of a contemporary parallel to that kind of interest in dream worlds.
Yeah. Well, that's a real setup of the question, because I'm in the midst of a project where I'm working with a group of artists exploring their own dreams and the dreams that we're sharing with each other, and then creating collective works of art. Works of art out of that, out of those dynamics. And we've been working together for almost 3 years now. Between my first and second class, we had a performance. I went back to New York. We had a performance at a gallery, kind of an experimental sound and performance festival, and we did a thing that involved dance and lighting and video. It was all revolving around the artist's dreams. And so it's all a way of answering your question, but yes, artists seem to have a tremendous, some anyway, I won't say all, this is kind of a mid-career group. They're not young and still kind of figuring out who they are. They're not old and bored. They're kind of mid-career, looking for action, looking for inspiration. They're all immigrants. In this particular group, the way we organized initially was everybody born one place, living someplace else, and part of the dynamics of our dream sharing has been around dreams that cross boundaries, that cross borders, that help people with multicultural identities kind of make sense of the world, particularly now. So the dynamics, I think it's where actually dreaming contributes a lot to culture, in the sense that kind of the natural human practice of sharing dreams, which this group I'm trying to model for them, just becomes this kind of automatic generator of creative ideas. You know, it's just like poof, and they go. They're just doing things. This is live research for me, and it makes me think that there's a lot more to be learned about the science of sleep and dreaming by mutual interactive dialogues, not just treating them as subjects, you know, analytic targets, but as collaborators in research with artists. So, great question. Sir, yeah.
Are there, other than REM, non-REM distinctions, are there different categories of dreams that one could talk about? Am I very conscious? You can be sleeping very lightly, and all of a sudden something terribly vivid happens that might even be more closely related to your life. That's the first question. And maybe it's related. How do you distinguish between, you know, trauma dreams, PTSD, horrible dreams, and then just dreaming? Is there a demarcation of definition?
Yeah, yes, there is. And this is where, you know, sleep research has revealed that, again, we go to sleep at night, we don't just flick off a switch. There's this whole world of conscious and unconscious activities. So both at the front end and the back end, sort of hypnagogic, hypnopompic phases of the sleep cycle. When we're falling asleep and we're leaving sleep, those are both neurologically amazing states and very distinctive in their own, often accompanied by imagery, sensations, and light. Towards the end of the night, and so most of the non-REM sleep happens the first half of the night, most of the REM sleep happens the second half of the night. And you can get by without REM sleep. You know, REM sleep, I mean, people will be deprived of REM sleep for quite a while. You can survive. You deprive someone of sleep completely, they'll die eventually. That's like and this is why just not even parenthetically, but any entity that practices sleep deprivation in any form of control of other people, that's torture. That is absolutely torture. So sleep deprivation, you know, physiologically does horrible things. The body will kill a person eventually. Within sleep, and you mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares, those are actually quite distinct from regular nightmares in the sense that they are often graphic, repetitive replayings of a traumatizing event. And therapists will say that over time, and if the healing process is going well, that those images will kind of bleed or blend into sort of regular dream imagery. So the healing involves kind of making things dreamier and getting out of being trapped into the graphic repetitive. But then there are night terrors, which happen in the first half of the night. If you have kids, you might have seen this. You know, they sit up, they're screaming, their eyes are wide open, they're breathing, and there's no conscious presence or awareness, right? And then they lie down, and it's like nothing, and they don't remember it the next morning, and you're like up all night just panicking. And you can imagine how these kinds of phenomena, there's literature on this, were interpreted in other cultural and religious and theological settings, right? That kind of behavior would lend itself to different kinds of interpretations, you know, possession, demonic presence, things like that. So yeah, so there's this complex mapping of yeah, yes, here, yes.
I was.
Well, no, that's okay. That's trying to do.
Forgive me.
In response to the first question, you used the word hardwiring to talk about like how, like whether it's like falling down or waking up.
Very
right?
anachronistic, yes.
I guess I'm interested when you're thinking, beyond like the sort of electronic analogy, I'm interested in when you're thinking about dreams being hardwired, I guess sort of what you mean by that, whether it's a biological proposition or like a sort of Jungian, like those are when you're thinking about things that are
Yes.
hard, yeah, you
Yes.
understand.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And this is, it's one of the reasons that I'm really grateful for the education I got here is that I feel I come into these debates in the dream research field certainly from a different angle than most people. And so I am trying to advocate for arguments that and theories that can account for the pervasive quality of some of these things. I don't, is anything universal? We find one counterexample and it's not universal anymore. But the pervasive cross-cultural phenomenology of dreaming, and to say this briefly, but it's a more complex theory. But where I've come down is the idea, not dreams per se, but the dreaming itself is a form of play. It's not like play, it's not similar to play, it is play. It is a form of play as play has evolved in not just humans, but many other species, mammals and birds throughout the animal kingdom. And play is a phenomenon, and this again goes into detail, but this is what I've worked on the past few years, trying to provide a better evolutionary foundation for thinking about the kind of things that I and others find interesting in dreams without relying on a really kind of, I'd say, blockheaded, reductionism based on brain science. And the phenomenology of play, looking at how play is predominant in a species with long childhoods that need a lot of developmental time after birth, that have complex nervous systems, that often live in complex social environments, so need to have a lot of kind of cognitive wherewithal to kind of deal in the complexities of the social situation. Dreaming seems REM sleep, and this is play and REM sleep share an almost identical profile zoologically, shall we say, that the same animals that have lots of REM sleep also have lots of play behaviors, and humans are kind of at the peak of both of those pyramids. So we'll have to take that as sort of stipulations there, and I can show you where I've written about that. But it's a way of getting to this question that dreaming is this kind of primal source of creative imagination, and that play is innately free-form and experimental and often oriented around primal concerns, but genuinely productive of new, novel insights and ways of going about things. So that's the way I try to get around the trap of getting caught in essentialisms, which many people do, and whether I succeed or not, I don't know. But I have been thinking a lot about that, and it's kind of a key question. Yeah.
My question is sort of not unrelated, and makes sense as a follow. I was intrigued by your characterization of Dorothy Egan's work on the manifest content of dreams, and how or whether that relates to the other points you made about reductionism and scientific approaches to this. Because in philosophy of mind, one of the main ways discussions about that show up is in terms of the status of a manifest or common sense view of the mental. So Wilfrid Sellers, for example, distinguished between the scientific image and the manifest image. The scientific image is the world under a scientific description. The manifest image is the world as it shows up to common sense experience. And there's a divide among philosophers of mind over what the status of the manifest is, with some saying, that's the problem we're trying to explain, that it's an illusion, what we want to do is understand what causes it, what produces it, and that's a story about the brain, right? Whereas other philosophers will say, no, the manifest is basic in a way that violates. everything at all about our practices makes sense, including our practices of scientific inquiry, only because they show up in the manifest, so you can't explain it away. So my question is, to what extent does the manifest content of dreams, as Ian was talking about it, correspond to or parallel that idea of the manifest? In other words, was she talking about something like the same problem? And what she's pushing back against with Freud and Jung is different in the sense that, as I understand it, they're not locating it in the physical. That it's still psychological, but they have the impulse to look under the hood rather than at what's manifest. So is there a parallel?
Yeah, well, I mean, the cynical answer is you don't need experts if everything's at the manifest level, right? You only need experts to help you figure things out if there's something hidden down there that only the right theory, the right tools, the right therapeutic methods can get at. So there's kind of a cynical answer to that Freud's critics and Jung's critics as well will say, hey, wait a minute, you've kind of defined this in such a way that only you and your guild have access to the goodies. Like, what's that about? And so what Egan at that level is, and it's, again, I think this is playing out in dream research now, where it's kind of opening it up. Sometimes actually we all have access to the manifest content. We all now actually have, you can download some of these fun tools of digital linguistic analysis and really see some things that people could not see before, that Dorothy Egan with her graph paper and pencil wanted to see, was getting a glimpse of, and now we just have a telescope where she had like a magnifying glass. So that's where it's still the manifest content, but it's now we have such more powerful tools to make, to glean meanings out of that it sort of upended the equation. Now it's like, are you sure there's a latent content? We're finding an awful lot here. Like, now what's your justification for giving us the latent? Freud's justification for even positing this to begin with was tendentious claim that nobody has any idea what their dreams ever mean on the surface. He says nobody ever knows. It's a complete mystery, which most people I don't think would necessarily agree with in their own lives. Sometimes you have a sense, you have a feeling, maybe you know right away. So actually, it's interesting the way you phrase that. It does make me think that we have kind of contemporary research domain that kind of upended and reversed, revalued that equation.
It stems from the question about art, I think, and the fascination with the experimental method. There was a book in around 1927 by someone called Dunn, A.W. Dunn, called Experiment with Time.
Experiment with Time, yeah.
And in that, he basically said, if you keep empirical records of your dreams, from the manifest content in your dreams, you will discover, actually he thought you discover the eternity of your soul, but you'll discover, and many artists, H.G. Wells, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Borges, Nabokov. Nabokov kept thousands after reading the book. And in fact, they've been published as Insomniac Dreams. And I guess my question is, if you take those databases at the individual level, that come from one particular kind of people of art, and then you compare them with because your massive project is a database across many different populations. Is that a resource for discovery about the kind of questions? About whether there's a different function of dreams amongst the, I don't know.
No, this is front burner research is gathering high quality, garbage in, garbage out. So it has to be good quality people who've been recording their dreams over a long period of time. People I've been working with sometimes are 30 or 40 or even 50-year long dream journals. And then comparing them to kind of baselines that I and some colleagues have been working on to kind of see where do people, are they similar to kind of average dreaming, where they differ from average dreaming, why would that be? And so the challenge is that even with as much data as I've got, it's like the tiniest little fraction of a drop compared to the ocean of dreaming, right? So and this is, I can feel it. Like this is where people who use empirical methods can get carried away, where you think, oh, I've got something, to 1,000 decimals of percentage accuracy. I've got something, right? Based on the sample you've got. So But to answer the question, yes, this is where I think a lot of, like I said, Dorothy Egan and others, I think, saw where this could be. They just didn't quite have the tools, the resources, the analytic abilities. But I think that's why I'm excited about the future. We have time maybe for your timekeeper.
Well, I feel like ending on you're excited about the future is the perfect. I think we're at time.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm happy to talk to anybody else.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.